What's up, YouTube? Travion from the Poor Man's Podcast here. The following is a clip I did with Dr. Donald Dutton. Dr. Dutton is an expert in domestic violence. He's written over 100 papers and about 5 or 6 books on the topic. For access to this full episode and access to other videos that have been demonetized on YouTube, make sure you become a Patreon. The link is in the description below. Enjoy the clip. Just one of the things in particular that kind of got me into your videos is your information seemed unbiased. In America, when it comes to domestic violence, a lot of people, when it comes to men dealing with domestic violence, a lot of people just look at it as a joke. We have a show called The View where one of the hosts, Sharon Osbourne, literally talked about having a man's penis cut off. It was a story where a man's penis was cut off and thrown in a garbage disposal, and she laughed at it on air. I mean, we have our pop stars like Cardi B saying that she openly stated that she drugged and robbed men and nobody even cares. I mean, you have the Johnny Depp situation. I just wanted you to for the people that's listening, can you clear the air when it comes to gender and domestic violence? Because a lot of people seem to think it's very exclusive to women dealing with this problem, but your data seems to show something else. Can you please just elaborate on that?
Sure. Well, there's two things. One is, what you're hitting on here is really, really important. That is just it's not just in the U.S. I mean, this perception that men don't feel pain from domestic violence is most prevalent in countries where women have come the furthest and have the most power. So that's the U.S., the U.K., Northern Europe, Canada, all those countries. It's a political view that has a strong component of misandry. And it's so entrenched that you can take a simple act that can't possibly have a sort of gender aspect to it, which is putting a lighted cigarette out on somebody's arm. Okay. Right. It's going to hurt. Whether you're man or woman, it's going to hurt. But if you ask people, would it hurt a man or woman more? They all say it would hurt the woman more. Now, women deal with childbirth. They deal with a lot of pain. Anyway, it's a perception that people have that whatever happens to the man is not important. I mean, I've given case examples to my classes where guys have been dipped in acid and had body parts cut off and horrible stuff, horrible stuff. And these are all true cases. I mean, went through the courts and the court information. So there's this perception that is kind of something we have to deal with in the terms of looking at male victimhood. Then there's the data, the information on who perpetrates domestic violence. Now, the U.S. is a world leader in this respect because there's been 5 excellent victim surveys done in the U.S. Huge samples, representative samples, starting from 1989 and running right up to 2004. And they all say the same thing, that it's 50% of reported domestic violence is bilateral. It's a two-person thing, back and forth, back and forth. 35% of the remainder, the unilateral domestic violence, is female perpetrated. 15% is male perpetrated. But of that 15%, 10% or 2/3 of it is just like a push and a shove or a slap. It's not serious stuff. So that leaves 5% that fits the stereotype of serious male perpetrated domestic violence. 5% of all domestic violence actually fits that stereotype. That's all. But we deal with it in policy, so that was the only thing happening.
Right. From those statistics, though, so it was actually found that women are more likely to commit domestic violence then.
Yes. Not
by very much, but definitely more likely from what it sounds like.
Quite a bit, 35% to 15%. And that's 5 separate studies with large samples, all done independent of each other. And they all find the same thing. So that strengthens it that much more. You got a collective sample here of over 25,000 respondents who answered these surveys. And, it's quite a bit to say 35 versus 15%.
Right. Whoa. So when you look at those statistics, do you find anything in particular as far as race or demographic? I mean, social class? Does it matter if you're Hispanic, Black, White, Asian, or rich or poor? Or
the biggest demographic predictor of incidents of domestic violence is age.
Okay.
Young people do it more than older people who worked it out. Everything else like race, socioeconomic class, etc., they're not as predominant. You get things like class times race interactions and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, they don't impact on the basic finding that females are more likely perpetrators than males. And that, of course, stands in complete opposition to our policy and our thinking. So, the police are kind of primed to arrest the man.
Right. So do you think that, I wonder if is it two people that are just attracted to each other through some psychological way? You know what I mean? Like for a person that domestic violence is committed against, do they have a internal thing that makes them seek out that kind of person in a relationship more of, or is it just you hit me, so I'm going to hit you? That's why it's usually 50% and usually.
Yeah, people get locked into, sort of a conflict scenario where nobody wants to give an inch and nobody wants to back down. And it escalates. And it escalates to a point sometimes where it gets physical. Now, it's interesting that in Oregon, there's a psychologist by the name of Deborah Capaldi, and she did something called the Oregon Youth Survey, which followed people from age 17 up until their middle 20s in Oregon for a long period of time. And she assessed everything, including mental health, psychological health, and domestic violence use. And what she found is that you would have these couples that would have a sort of level of combat. I mean, they would have these conflicts that would get pretty heated. They'd be yelling and screaming, maybe pushing. But on one particular day, it would get out of hand. It would go above its normal level of conflict. And then the police would get called. And then the police would arrest the man 81% of the time, even though with these couples she'd been following, it was really clear that both the man and woman were equally physically violent.
Right.
And that's by the way, that's a state that has dual arrest as a possibility.
Okay. So there is just kind of the idea that if the police get called, both people are going to jail for the night.
Well, it has dual arrest capability. I mean, they could do that in Oregon, but what they were doing was arresting the man only, just the man. They weren't arresting.
Do you think that if they were to implement a rule where they were to arrest both people? Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So they were basically supposed to arrest both people, but they were still just arresting the man.
They could arrest both people. They could.
Okay.
If they had evidence that there'd been if they'd asked the questions, they would have found that out. But typically, it was just sort of, okay, it's a domestic. Yeah, here you're the guy. We're out of here.
Right. Okay. See, because when I'm looking at a lot of what's going on in a lot of European countries, so you got Canada, you got America, you got you get where I'm going. A lot of Western civilizations. It seems as though there is a propaganda. It seems as though there is a goal out there, and a lot of the statistics I read are pushed by people or groups that I have to assume hate men, or dislike men to some point, or have an agenda for other people to fear men, for women in particular to fear men. Do you think there is a political agenda to make men look like monsters, basically? Do you think that that's a thing out there?
There's absolutely a political agenda. It's about power, and it's about getting more power for women by any means. And there's been lying going on with domestic violence statistics for at least 35 years, because I've watched it firsthand for at least 35 years. And governments just look the other way. Doesn't matter what country you're in. I mean, the Violence Against Women Act, don't get me started.
Can you actually, I really do want you to get started, because a lot of us, we're from the ground, so we don't know very much about this topic. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on in particular, because I know you're a specialist in it. Can you please explain to us that what you just spoke about there?
Okay. Well, first of all, just let me say, your point about propaganda was excellent. And if you look at a lot of newspaper reports on domestic violence, you find that there are, in fact, elements of propaganda there. One of the things is to equate a worst case scenario, like a really horrific case against a woman, with domestic violence statistics, which makes it seem like all those cases are as bad as that worst case. And I just got through telling you, maybe 5% involve severe violence by a man. That 5% of all domestic violence, that's all. So, typically it's not that case. Secondly, you inflate the risk. I mean, one of the cases where this comes up the most is women leaving a relationship who think that their husband's going to stalk and kill them because they're leaving the relationship, based on those few cases where it happens. But it's still a very rare event.
Right.
Well, but the propaganda would have you say, I've had women call me and say, I'm leaving my husband. Am I in danger? And I say, well, has there been any violence? No. Why do you think you're in danger? Well, I'm leaving a relationship. You know how men are. I'm going, no, tell me how men are.
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, I'll have these conversations with girls my age. I'm 25. So I have these conversations and just, you can tell that there's an innate fear. And it's because this idea is being pushed out that, historically speaking, men have dragged women along. You know what I'm saying? Like, we didn't get, my opinion is, we didn't get to an age of iPhones in abundance from men just grabbing power from, we did that by cooperating with each other. But for some reason, there's a agenda to push the idea that we got to this point by men just basically pulling women along, sexually assaulting them and abusing them, and women were uncooperative and unwilling and didn't like the direction that men were taking us as humanity. You know what I mean? So it just seems that it's so malicious. You know what I mean? And it doesn't seem to be helping anybody. It seems to be driving a lot of fear. Do you? Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Not helping anybody when you start manufacturing false statistics, for me, it always comes down to, what do the data say? I was raised as a scientist, so sorry. What do the data say? Let's base our policy on that. Let's base our fears on being realistic. Is there an actual incidence of these things going on, or is it much lower than what we think? People are terrified of sharks. Well, guess what? The chances are no shark's ever going to hurt you in your lifetime.
And that's a good point. But you talked about, I watched the video and you spoke about women kind of using this, and just the idea that men are just more violent and innately commit domestic violence. That idea and how it's affected men getting custody of their children when it comes to divorce, and that just being used as a tool. Can you please explain that to other people with maybe some personal experiences that you may have seen or heard of when it comes to that?
Yeah, it's, if you get custody cases, the first thing a woman's lawyer is going to ask her is, well, has he been abusive? Well, and then they'll find one particular incident which they'll try to magnify to make this guy seem like he's going to be dangerous in the future. I did one case in Seattle where they had such a hard time finding anything on this guy. They went back 30 years to a woman he'd insulted in a bar and put her on as a witness.
Isn't that
that this guy was therefore a danger to his kid, even though he'd never been abusive to his kid or even to his wife.
Right.
So, there's a case. It's a weapon in custody cases. And what you actually find is, even if there is a history of violence against a woman, there's only an 8% chance that overlaps towards violence towards a kid. It's not necessarily the case that a wife abuser is going to be a child abuser, but it's a political battle in family court all the time.